this Conservative administration. They've got a heck of a lot on their plate, Owen.
I don't want... I'm sorry, just to raise it. The reason I'm only going to say this, because immigration is not the top issue that voters prioritise. That is a graph from March 2015. That's not...
I do beg your pardon. I don't want to cause... No, that's fine.
No, the reason I say that is it's so important to say immigration is not the top issue, and it's actually fallen very drastically.
So migrants not the top issue?
No, and that's why...
I have seen polling saying that it's the top issue.
Yes, but only in over 65s. It has actually got worse.
Okay.
It has increased in the last month.
That's totally my error, because I just looked up the first graph on the top issue. And they're all the obvious things anyway.
The reason I said it is just because actually I don't... The reason I have to correct it is I don't think that strategy has the same salience that it once did. What was the question, though? Sorry, quickly.
Well, I mean, there's a heck of a lot there, and the question is whether it's so much that they can't get through it.
Look, I think people have to ask themselves, are they better off than they were in 2010? And for the average Briton, they're not. In 2026, the research suggests that the average Briton, working Briton, will be poorer than 2008. And do you remember in America, there was always that question, Ronald Reagan put it in a presidential election, do you feel better than you did before the last election?
I'll give you the exact phrase. He said, ask yourself this question. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
Is Reagan alive again?
That's it.
It's been
so it was 1980, Reagan-Carter.
But the point is, whether it be the National Health Service, whether it be housing, whether it be our infrastructure, whether it be levelling up, everything has got worse. That's just by any objective metric.
And I was throwing the kitchen sink. I mean, OK, leave aside the date of the poll. You get the gist of it. There's a heck of a lot that's on people's minds. Okay?
Yeah, but at the moment, it isn't just about the government.
Right.
I think this is the key, is that you have to see a bigger picture. And you ask about immigration. Interestingly enough, it is clearly a mega topic in Italy, in France, in Sweden, in Germany, that actually there is a whole global dynamic that is shifting. So it's no surprise that actually immigration is rising up the in terms of polling, where people are feeling more interested about it, particularly in the over 65s. But the key thing is about the economy, and it isn't just about the things that the government has or hasn't done. We have had a pandemic which has completely walloped the economy. And we have also had, or we are currently going through, a war in Ukraine, which is really affecting the key metric, which is food prices.
I'm with you. So wait a minute. So what I'm hearing from the two of you, from you, Lucy, is that there is stuff that is bad and difficult that is not the government's fault. And Ukraine, COVID are two examples, right? And migration,
massive,
you might say.
And they're massive examples.
So you can't blame the government for the dinghies.
And that's why we've got to be able to say that Rishi Sunak is someone who represents change.
Okay.
Well, just on that. I mean, actually, if you take the squeeze in wages, that predates both Ukraine and COVID. And we've actually gone through a much worse squeeze in wages than other comparable countries. I mean, you think about immigration. I mean, the perverse thing about this country is you have a government which constantly rants and raves about migrants. In my opinion, blaming migrants for things like the government cutting back on the NHS and public services. It's not migrants who did that. But at the same time, we have record levels of immigration. I think that's a good thing. I think immigration enriches our country. But you get the spectre of government ministers constantly going about how terrible it is, whilst we have high levels of immigration. It's so perverse. And the truth is, what this government always does is say, don't be angry at us, because we cut back on everything, because we left the country in a mess, because your living standards are worse because of us. Instead, be angry at benefit claimants, at migrants, at refugees, at trans people.
All right,
anyone and everyone except the people in charge.
Let's talk to Kimberly in Greater Manchester. Oh, of course, you're where the conference is and where HS2 is not going to be. Kimberly, hello.
Hi, good to speak to you.
I wonder whether, I know we started with that derailment image, whether that's what's happened to Rishi Sunak's party.
Yeah, I think it has, and I think that I actually work in the community and work with food banks and have seen real first-hand the deprivation that's impacted since 2010. And I think that change is needed, and whether it is the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, the Green Party, whoever, and I think that it really needs to happen. We've had too much moving about. If you had that in any other organisation, you'd really be looking to your executives to see, are they managing the company correctly? And I really think that, as I say, working in the community and seeing food banks and seeing the real deprivation and period poverty, and it shows that the system is not working. And
so
that's
the message today from Sunak is going to be, I am on your side. Would you buy that?
No, definitely not. We've had too many broken promises over the years, and I know that Owen's touched on a lot of that with the facts and the figures, but actually seeing it firsthand, it's heartbreaking.
But Lucy, go on.
So you're talking about people making broken promises, but the one politician where you could look at him and say, actually, he really stepped up to the plate when he was Chancellor, and there was a furlough scheme which was the first in the world during a crisis which nobody knew what it would be like and how long it would last. This was a man who really understood how people were going to be affected in their pocket, and he stood up and delivered for that.
Wow.
So my sense is that today what you're going to get is someone who is saying HS2 in its current format is simply too expensive. I've got to make tricky decisions. I've got to make sure that I can give you more money back in your pocket.
That's not what's going to happen.
Kimberly, answer this.
When he has a speech to say, I'm going to be able to save money by changing HS2, that money is going to go in the pockets of the electorate.
So I completely disagree with that, and the reasons are because nothing that the Conservative government have said throughout the pandemic, when they were having Partygate, all the expectations of the general public. I was out in the communities actually speaking to people that had lost their jobs, and they've struggled ever since. They've relied on food banks. They are hard-working NHS nurses. They are hard-working NHS.
But it might not be the Prime Minister's fault, because he's got two options. One, he can say, as Lucy says, listen, some of this isn't down to the government. And the other one is he can start campaigning against the governments before him, even if it's the same party. Well, I mean, that's the amazing thing about politics. He started campaigning against Boris Johnson now.
Well, but what they always do, the Conservatives, is try and pretend that every time there's a change in leader, they're a completely new government. They're not. They're the same people who, in the case of Rishi Sunak, voted for all the policies before which cut back the NHS, which cut back in terms of housing, which cut back in terms of infrastructure, which is why we have crumbling schools. And in the case of Rishi Sunak now, if you look at his government and his administration, I mean, you say about HS2, because in 2019, levelling up was at the core of the 2019 manifesto. The point about what they're doing with HS2 is they're going to try and use that money for a pre-election giveaway to certain voters to try and bribe them into bringing them back into government. But HS2 is about bringing prosperity to the Northwest, because if you get better transport links, like other countries, it's so embarrassing that you've got all these other European countries who have had high-speed rail for donkeys years.
We are smaller than France.
We're not really a rich country.
Listen, I'm not an HS2 fan. I have never understood why it's London up to the north. It surely should have been actually having logistics across the country. That would have been. That would have brought more prosperity.
London makes sense because it is the capital, and then if you get faster transport.
Pause, guys. This is great.